Hello, everybody. My name is Jimmy Smith from the Wine with Jimmy channel. Welcome back for another session on understanding a WSET Level 3 topic. This one is the third in our Bordeaux series. So this is understanding the left bank, the 1855 classification, and the grape variety that is the mainstay of the left bank, which is Cabernet Sauvignon. So we'll go through the geography of the area, looking at some wonderful maps. We'll do a Google Earth video so you can get an idea and a feel for what we're looking at. Then we'll go through Cabernet Sauvignon, the classification, and then we'll do a working written question at the end, which is very useful to help you to understand what may be asked of you in a level 3 examination and how you should answer, structure your answers. All of the social media is found at the bottom of the slides at Wine with Jimmy on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, my 2 wine schools down there, West London Wine School, South London Wine School, and my wine bar, Streatham Wine House. If you have any comments or questions, do pop them in the comment section for this on the YouTube video or get in touch on that social media. Also, there is this is going to be a part of the e-learning portal. So we have on the winewithjimmy.com website an e-learning portal where you can purchase a subscription for level 1, 2, or 3, which gives you huge wealth of access of multiple choice questions, short written answer questions, also revision sessions, flashcards, and many more videos, member-only videos. So please do have a look at that. There is a wonderful chateau which is found in Saint-Estèphe in the northern part of the Haut-Médoc. This is Chateau Costestonel, which is very famous for its pagodas, as you can see there, 3 of them, very proud and quite an iconic estate. This is a second growth in the 1855 classification, something we'll be looking at a little bit later. Okay, so let's get rocking and rolling. So let's have a look, first of all, of course, just as usual, where we are. We are in Bordeaux of France. I'm not going to go much into climate weather conditions. That was covered on session 1 of these 4 videos about Bordeaux. This is session 3, video 3. But that is it. Southwest of France, of course, the largest of quality AOC regions in France, dedicated 9 out of 10 bottles to red wines. Of course, what we're looking at here on this section for the most part. So yes, very famous for reds, this area, dominated by, of course, Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, and others like Cabernet Franc. We'll be covering Cabernet Sauvignon on this session. So this is the left bank. So when we mention the left bank, it roughly corresponds to the areas that are left of the Gironde. And the Gironde is this quite large, let me get my arrow up here, quite large shipping estuary just here. But also the Garonne, which is here, which runs through Bordeaux and then runs into the Gironde, the confluence with the Dordogne. So it's this area. I mean, it is anywhere left of those rivers, and that will incorporate Graves, Pessac, and etc. down in the south. But I think people informally mean this area, this purple area, when it's the left bank. So this is the first part we'll look at. So this is the Médoc and the Haut-Médoc. Okay, so that is the Médoc and the upper Médoc. A little bit of an exaggeration. It's probably upper in terms of quality, but it's not upper in terms of location. It probably is slightly more hillier, but we are not looking about extreme site variation like you would do in places like Alsace, for instance. This is relatively flat. I mean, there are some hills. A lot of the names of the chateau are actually named after hills or hillocks, such as Grand Puy means a large hillock. You have things like Lafitte. Lafitte is another name for a hillock. So you do have hills here and some aspect and some slope, but they are not as dramatic as some other areas in France. The left-hand side then of the annotations here, which is the Médoc and the Haut-Médoc, are districts. These are areas which are then composed of villages. Well, the Médoc in the north actually isn't. So let's underline this first of all. Hold on, let me get my my arrow going here. La-di-da. I do need to just go here. Yep, so we have the Médoc, which is just here. So the Médoc is the most northerly point, going towards the spit of the Gironde, and it is the most affected by the Atlantic. Here, it's predominantly clay soils with some gravel. It's not the famous deep gravel that we'll get to in a second. The Médoc, when wines are labelled as the Médoc, they do tend to be some of the more simpler styles of the left bank. You tend to have a higher proportion of Merlot actually in the wines of the Médoc. And that's really due to the fact you've got this kind of limestoney clay soils and less gravel. So yes, there is Merlot mainly found in the Médoc area. Then we come to the upper Médoc. And the upper Médoc is important because, of course, this is the famous area. This whole area was originally swampland and was drained by the Dutch in the 1600s when they teamed up with the French really to produce more wine to distill and use into brand vine. So this was very importantly drained by the Dutch, and that left these wonderful gravel beds. The Haut-Médoc is littered with these gravelly soils. The deepest of the gravel soils is found in Pauillac, one of the major reasons really why it has a concentration of some of the highest quality chateaux. And then we have good levels of gravel in Saint-Estèphe, Saint-Julien, and probably the shallowest in Margaux, probably why it produces some of the most elegant, for the most part. I mean, Chateau Margaux is a beast amongst itself. So this is the Haut-Médoc area. It is made into a number, or is separated into a number of villages. You are not required to know all of them, but the 4 that you are required to recognize are listed on the right-hand side of this map. So it's the right side annotation. So that is going from Saint-Estèphe, Pauillac, Saint-Julien, and Margaux. They are your 4 villages, and you'll see that they are located on the easterly side of the Haut-Médoc. That is therefore further away from the Atlantic, and also experiencing a bit more of the warmth and circulation that comes from the Gironde, the very large river, the shipping estuary. You will find actually that this area is quite well protected by sand dunes, and those sand dunes are what are located along this area. Okay, coming down here. So these are quite significant sand dunes that take quite a while to get to the top of them. These are no small, minuscule and insignificant. They are large and almost mountainous with their appearance, and that offers a break, a protection from the Atlantic for these regions, and certainly the Haut-Médoc. And then below that, Bordeaux city sort of latitude, and below is the Landes pine forest. So that would be, let's do that in a nice green color. That's kind of down this area and beyond and down. The Europe's largest man-made forest, over 1 million hectares of forest planted here to protect the Bordeaux region. So these villages then, Saint-Estèphe, Pauillac, and Saint-Julien and Margaux. All of these are predominantly made from Cabernet Sauvignon, and really due to the fact that the soil here is gravel. And as you know, Cabernet Sauvignon, we'll go through this later, requires warm conditions because it's a late ripening variety. So the fact that you have these rocky, gravelly soils which are able to absorb heat and therefore elongating the season into October, means that Cabernet Sauvignon has a much higher probability of ripening here. So really you can craft some of the most high quality expressions over a long, gentle, growing season. So that is why Cabernet Sauvignon is the predominant grape variety of this area, of all Saint-Estèphe, Pauillac, Saint-Julien, Margaux. Secondary grape variety here would be Merlot. In some areas, there's more Merlot than others, like in Saint-Estèphe and Médoc, for instance. And a tertiary grape would be Cabernet Franc in this area. The wines here typically, so Saint-Estèphe through to Margaux, are a core of black fruit, often black currant and cassis, with all of the trimmings. So you might get a little bit of black currant leaf, a little bit of mint, and you'll get those cedar cigar box kind of characteristics from the oak and tobacco when it's aged a little bit as well. The tannins of these wines, because it's Cabernet, are exceptionally grippy and astringent, that is quite intense in their youth. But they do resolve themselves and mature quite nicely. That then allows all of the aromas and flavors to come out. They do age very gracefully and very well, producing some of the most alluring, wonderful, complex wines with some time behind them. Okay, so that is this top area. We're going to go to Bordeaux City and below for the next one. So here is Bordeaux City to the top, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and below that, in the urban sprawl of Bordeaux, we find two hamlets called Pessac and Léognan, and this actually creates an AOC. Very famously planted by the Dutch initially, fair significant amount of white initially, but it has increased in red production. Pessac is famous for whites and red, and with the members only video, which is the fourth one, the one that follows this on the e-learning portal, we talk about the white wines and sweet wines of this whole area that's highlighted here, Pessac and Graves, and of course the sweet wines. So Pessac-Léognan then, here we're just talking about reds for the meantime, but it will produce whites as well, very complex. The reds here, now in Pessac and Graves, there is a propensity to use more Merlot in the wines down here, but Pessac does have some famous estates, Smith-Lafitte and Aubryon and La Mission and so on, which have very sizable amounts of Cabernet Sauvignon behind them. So therefore, there are some expressions here of the red wines of Pessac and Léognan which are comparable to the slide before. That is Margaux, for instance, and other wines of that area. Some rather complex ones, but generally speaking, most Pessac-Léognan reds will be a little bit lighter and less structured than the Haut-Médoc from the slide before. Okay, and then Graves will be more Merlot, probably less structured than Pessac and a bit more fragrant and fruity in style, and once again having more Merlot in the blend. So we're going to show you a video now, which is a slightly longer video than usual, and it's really just to give you an idea of this landscape. So we're going to look at Bordeaux City. We're going to then go through the main areas of the Médoc and the Haut-Médoc, and then down to Pessac and Léognan. So let me just pop this up on the screen for our link here from YouTube. Here we go. So, oh, that's Costas Donnell from Google Earth there, but we won't begin there. So let's go through this video to give you a real good idea and of course a 3D view of our landscape that we're talking about. There is France, and now we're focusing in and zooming in on Bordeaux. We're going to go to Bordeaux City first of all. Of course, the name of the region, the name of the city, and you can see the expanse of the city around the river Garonne. Here we have the Basilica Saint-Michel, which is a very famous site, beautiful as well. We have the Porte de Bourgogne, which is just nearby. We have the Place de la Bourse as well, and no doubt some of you have visited all of these. And then Place de Quinconce as well, which is this one just here. So some very famous sites that make Bordeaux a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So let's now head to the north part of Bordeaux. So we're going up, and you can see the wonderful fork of lightning, I call it, the rivers here. We're going up to near the Gironde, where we're looking at the real northern area, and this is the Médoc. Remember, an area famous for making slightly lighter wines with more predominant Merlot due to the limestone. But it is the Haut-Médoc, the upper Médoc here, which is possibly the most famous. And we're going to focus, first of all, on our most northerly village here, which is called Saint Estèphe. So let's have a look at Saint Estèphe. And the picture that we had at the start of the presentation was of a famous chateau here called Cos d'Estornel, which is a second growth, a cru Classé from 1855. And that's its estate. There is the chateau, as you can see there, with those 3 pagodas. So this is really the beginning land of more Cabernet Sauvignon in the wines on gravelly soils, making very powerfully tannic, acidic, and long-lived wines, which take a long time to age. We're now going to head down to the next village, which is Pauillac. And with Pauillac, which is located more on the river Gironde, we're going to actually have a look at, I believe, we're just going down to Lafite Rothschild. It's in Pauillac, but it's right on the border of Saint Estèphe. Here is the estate itself, some of the vineyards. We're not actually seeing the chateau. It's in the background, but this is Mouton Rothschild, quite famous place. Below that is Saint-Julien, and Saint-Julien is a little bit less gravel, but still, of course, making some very fine wines. We're going to focus at Chateau Léoville-Barton, one of really 4 Léovilles that you find in the area. Here is the entrance to Léoville-Barton. No chateau there on this one though, but never mind. But famous once again for making some wonderful complex wines made by Anthony Barton. And then finally down to Margaux, which is the first main village as you head actually out of Bordeaux. And we're looking at Chateau Margaux, of course, the most famous here, which is a first growth, which is the highest accolade here on this left bank for red wines. Very famous, and the only first growth of Margaux. So Chateau Margaux of Margaux, the beautiful chateau itself. And then we'll come down below Bordeaux. So there's Bordeaux city again, and here in the suburbs we find Pessac and Léognan. And in Pessac and Léognan we have the famous first growth here as well, which is called Chateau Haut-Brion. And here is the land of Haut-Brion, and there is the chateau of Haut-Brion as well. So it gives you an idea really of the landscape. It's not the hilliest, but you'll see lots of contiguous plots here because the land is owned and tied to the chateau, where they make a Grand Vin, a main wine. It is gravelly for the most part, and it is dominated by Cabernet Sauvignon. Okay, great. So that gives you a bit of an idea of the landscape. The grape variety we've mentioned so many times then is Cabernet Sauvignon. So this grape variety really finds its home in Bordeaux. It is a progeny, an offspring of Sauvignon Blanc and Cabernet Franc, therefore shares some quite similar genetic characteristics, which is normally those green elements that you find in Cabernet. It is very thick-skinned as a variety, which means it's got lots of anthocyanin, that's the color, has a fair amount of tannin as well, and then some very high acidities that come from the grape itself. So it's a combination here of making real concentrated, structured, and then acidic wines, really destined for long aging. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, Cabernet Sauvignon is a late ripener. It needs a longer season and warmth. So here it really needs help because we're looking at a moderate maritime climate, not a warm, but a moderate. So you need the soils to help here. And the soils are gravels, of course, which elongate the season by absorbing that heat. If Cabernet is not ripened well enough, unfortunately, it can be quite green and can be quite astringent. So you'll often find a domination of more of the green characters. The kind of green pepper, minty notes can be quite strong, and the kind of stalky characteristics. It can also be quite bitter, quite green with its tannin as well. So if it is not fully ripe, they will often then rely on other grape varieties which they have ripened well enough, things like Merlot, for instance, and maybe Cabernet Franc. So Cabernet Sauvignon can be found as a varietal or a blend, but here in Bordeaux, it is as a blend. It is not the most consistent climate for it. If you compare it to the Mediterranean climate of somewhere like Napa, they have a consistency there, and that's why you can find many 100% Cabernet Sauvignons. But here, really, it needs the help of Merlot. It needs the body and the alcohol of Merlot. So it will often be found as a blend, nearly always really found as a blend due to the inconsistency of the climate. So blended with Merlot, but elsewhere it may be blended with other varieties in Spain, like Tempranillo, in Italy with varieties like Sangiovese, and in Australia with Shiraz. So it can be blended. But here it is Merlot, it is Cabernet Franc, and it is Petit Verdot, which are the ones you need to know what it's blended with here in Bordeaux. Now, Cabernet has enough structure and tannin that it does not need the stems in production, so they will be destemmed as they come into the winery. They often don't go through a pre-fermentation extraction, but they will go through careful extraction techniques, really due to the fact that Cabernet Sauvignon has quite a bit of tannin to give. So they have to be quite careful with the amount of punch downs and pumping overs that will be done. So careful cap management is very common with Cabernet Sauvignon. Oxidative measures may be used as well, and that may be fermentations in oak barrels, for instance. There may be post-fermentation extractions as well. So this is settling the wine after fermentation on its skins, and that's said to give a bit more of a gentle smoothness to the tannin and not so much of a bitter astringent tannin. But it is very important to work with what you've got with Cabernet. So if the grapes have come in a little bit underripe, you really don't need to work it too much because it will extract too much of the green tannin. So it's important to know what you've got and work with it. But in Bordeaux, because of the amount of knowledge here, it's been a center of enology for France for many, many years. They do understand the grape variety very well today. So it's a grape that normally comes in with good ripeness, or there's heavy selection that is made. Fermentation temperatures tend to be relatively high, 26 to 30, to extract its flavor, its tannin, and its color. And wines will be aged oxidatively. Cabernet normally will be put in oak. Often quite high percentages of new oak are used because Cabernet has the guts to really withstand that new oak. Oxidative notes are important to sort of help soften the tannins, but also all of this will add a bit more complexity behind it as well. And expect somewhere like 12 to 24 months of aging in oak or new oak. French oak is the more norm here, as well as you'd expect. So Cabernet's characteristics, of course, expect high tannin, high acidity, good color behind it as well, but quite moderate alcohols. Often Cabernet dominated wines sit somewhere around 12.5 to 13.5. Merlot dominant for the more premium ones are normally a little bit more than that. So the flavor profile is more primary in its youth, which is black fruit and green notes. So black cherry, black currant cassis, and then things like a bit of green pepper, mint, along those lines, eucalypt. Those characteristics, those green notes, will be more exacerbated in cooler years. Expect things like cedar, tobacco, cigar, certainly with the oak influence as well. Okay, so that is Cabernet Sauvignon, the principal grape variety. If you're wondering about what Merlot is like in Cabernet Franc, that was covered in session 2 or video 2 of the 4 Bordeaux ones. The one before this, mentioning, or actually, sorry, session 1, the first one when we talked around Pomerol and Merlot. Okay. So the last thing we'll talk about before we move on to a question is the classification of the left bank. Now, this is what we call the 1855 classification. It was a classification created by a group of merchants who were sort of listing a hierarchy of quality for the 1855 Paris exhibition on the orders of Napoleon III. So this 1855 classification was quite a ground trend setter for its time. Initially, what happened was 60 chateaux were classified as what are called cru Classé. So that's what we have on the right-hand side just there. So let's underline that. So these are Cru Classé. It may seem on the label, sometimes it says Cru Classé on 1855, but it basically means it's from that elite group of chateaux. 61 today, 60 originally. It then is split, the Cru Classé is split into 5 league tables, and they are called growths. So this will be maybe Première Cru Classé, Deuxième Cru Classé, etc. First, second, third, fourth, and fifth growth. You will not find the number of the classification on the label. It will just say Cru Classé. So you have those 5-tier system, which is like a league table. The only thing it goes into any detail that you will need to know is actually understanding which 5 chateaux are in the first growth category. And they are all listed on the left-hand side there. So these are Lafite Rothschild and Mouton Rothschild, Latour, Margaux, and Haut-Brion. In the video, we saw Mouton Rothschild and Haut-Brion, and Margaux, in fact, as well. So these are your top ones, of course, commanding very premium prices and often sold as commodities and collector's items, sometimes at the behest and sadness of people that like to enjoy and drink these wines. So that really was created 160, 70 years ago. And if you weren't in this elite group, you were just classified as a Bordeaux wine. So what I have done on this triangle chart for you is show you that generic Bordeaux is at the bottom. Now that's quite a big encompassing category. There's lots of wines that fall into that, but it also is from all over Bordeaux, generic Bordeaux. But it gives you an idea that really was the elite, or the, let's call it the nobility or the aristocracy of the Cru Classés, and then the mighty big amount of the plebs and the serfs, and that's the kind of generic Bordeaux. They realized that the gap was too big between the rich and the poor here. So in the 1930s, they created the classification, which here sits in the middle. This is what we call Cru Bourgeois. So Cru Bourgeois was created really as that middle ground. Sometimes somewhere around sort of like 400 odd are classified as Cru Bourgeois, and the newer classifications are actually classified on the vintage and not the chateau. So wines will be reassessed every year to gain their Cru Bourgeois classification. This used to be actually split up into 3 tiers as well, but today it is just Cru Bourgeois. It used to be Cru Bourgeois Exceptionnel, Cru Bourgeois Supérieur, and then Cru Bourgeois, which of course French love their bureaucracy and their terminology, but now it is just Cru Bourgeois. It is an exciting thing to look out for on a label because these wines are affordable, still cost sort of, 15 to 30 pounds roughly per bottle, but they're much more affordable than the Cru Classés, and they are better than a lot of the other wines found in the left bank. So Cru Bourgeois is a good category to look at. Certainly for good value for money on the label. Okay, so that is your classification system. In 1855, also Sauternes was classified in Barsac, but that is for a next section, which is the members only session 4. Okay, so that is your classification system. Now, a few questions just to look at. Here is a label of a Chateau Grand Pauillac, one of my favorites and also quite affordable, from Pauillac. So this is a very famous area. Pauillac, remember, very prestigious. This Grand Puy is the hill, big hill of Lacoste, and Lacoste is the family name, Boré Lacoste. Why would this wine be sold at a premium price point? Okay, lots to talk about here. So first of all, this wine, as it says at the top of the label, this wine is classified as a Grand Cru Classé. So let's just identify exactly where that is found. So that's right up here. Grand Cru Classé, which means it's ranked as one of the best estates in Bordeaux, part of that elite group of 61. This is actually a 5th growth, but often punches above its weight. That's not found in your textbooks. That's all you need to write here is what's on the screen. What else can we say here? Well, we can say that it is also produced from the village of Pauillac. which has a very high reputation. Many of the villages on the left bank do, but this is specifically very high, as it holds some of those first growth wines. 3 out of 5, Lafite, Latour, and Mouton are all found in this village area. Has very deep gravelly soils and produces some of the best Cabernet Sauvignon. So from the label there, that's what you can identify as being a premium style wine. Okay, so we're really focusing here on the fact that we are talking about the village of Pauillac and then the Cru Classé part of this label. Okay, next thing. What is likely to be the main grape variety of this wine? We've been obviously focusing on this a lot. It is Cabernet Sauvignon. Normally, you're looking at somewhere around 50 to 85% of Cabernet Sauvignon being found in the Haut-Médoc wines. As this wine is produced in a moderate climate, this grape may struggle to ripen fully. What effect could this have on the wine? So this is really linking into the red wine making section of your textbook and understanding that Cabernet Sauvignon, when underripe, could be more astringent and bitter with its tannin and has more distinct herbaceous characteristics. And those herbaceous characteristics, some people see as a bit of a fault because it means very much underripeness. Some people can manage with it very well. You may note that a parent of Cabernet Sauvignon is Cabernet Franc, which is very well known for having quite herbaceous characteristics. Describe this wine. Now we know it's Cabernet Sauvignon. This wine will have a density, a concentration, or a core of black fruit. And when you talk about that, please think about it a little bit like your tasting examination. Just saying black fruit is quite vague. Black currant. So you can say black fruit, but then say black currant or say black cherry, because you can find them here as well. Black currant leaf. You could also have things like mint or green pepper here, complemented by cedar and cigar notes from the oak aging. They are wines marked with a grippy tannin, that means quite an intensive tannin, in their youth, that soften, allowing flavors to become more expressive. So you should say that soften with age, allowing the flavors to become more expressive. So basically, the tannin that kind of encapsulates the wine and is dominant to start with starts to sort of break away and soften and becomes a little bit sweeter and rounder, and then all of the aromas and flavors start to really become distinguished and aromatic from a wine like this. So really that starts, depending on the vintage, somewhere around 5 to 10 years after a Cabernet Sauvignon Bordeaux wine has been made. Please state the major blending grape variety for Cabernet Sauvignon in each of the following countries. Just quite an easy one. In Italy, we're looking at Cabernet Sauvignon being found really famously in Tuscany, where we find it blended with the grape of Tuscany, Jupiter's blood, Sangiovese. A lot of very famous super Tuscans here. So I'll scribble some of these down. So let me put here, so famous for super Tuscans, especially like the Bulgari DOC that we have, Bulgari DOC. In fact, with the Bulgari, there is a lot of Sangiovese Cabernet blends, but you can actually, in Bulgari, just have Bordeaux varieties within their DOC, quite famously. Sangiovese is the grape. Then we've got Spain next. So Spain, of course, pick the major grape here of Spain, which is Tempranillo. And then in places like the Pago areas, so the Dio Pagos, which are the single estates that hold a very high classification. They'll often be blended between Bordeaux varieties and Tempranillo. But you'll also find a lot of Cabernet and Tempranillo blended in places like Castilla-La Mancha as well. Okay, So that's Tempranillo for Spain. Australia, of course, their major leading black grape variety is Shiraz. This is both for premium and for inexpensive wines. There's a lot of mass-produced Cabernet Shiraz, as well as some great top-end wines like Penfolds and Henschke and so on. So Cabernet Shiraz, both expensive and premium from Australia. And of course, in Bordeaux, the principal most grown grape in Bordeaux is Merlot, and it's often used as a kind of a softening grape variety for the astringent Cabernet Sauvignon. If you are looking to bring a wine into market earlier, and you have a lot of Cabernet Sauvignon, often you'll use a lot of Merlot to make it more accessible to an earlier market. So that is the end of our session 3 of 4 sessions on Bordeaux. This, sadly, is the last of the free content. If you want to watch the last video, which looks at sweet and white wines of Bordeaux, then you'll have to sign up to our online portal at the winewithjimmy.com webpage and click on e-learning portal. It doesn't just have members-only videos, it has a whole host of things which are excellent aids at really helping you study and prepare yourself for your level 3 examination. Things like flashcards, things like revision sessions, things like short written answer questions, multiple choice questions, and of course more video content for members only. Also videos which are released normally 1 to 2 months in the future for free content are available immediately on that. So there's a lot more content to be found on there for the subscription service. So thank you so much for your time. If you have any concerns, comments or questions, please pop them in the comments section below this video on YouTube. Otherwise, please check us out on social media if you are that way inclined, with @WineWithJimmy, at West London Wine, which is the wine school in Fulham, South London Wine, the wine school in Streatham, and Streatham Winehouse, which is our cool, wonderful wine bar. Twitter, Instagram and Facebook. Next time we're in London, please come and see us for a class, a glass or a bottle. I've been Jimmy Smith. Thank you.